Hello, and welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. I am Matt Lehman. I'm the person who's streaming here, and we're going to do some Python development, some Django development. And if you don't know what that is, Django is the probably the most popular web framework in the Python programming ecosystem. We're specifically building a software as a service, which is an online website, basically. And we're going to be working on the software as a service that I run as a side project for my wife. It's called College Conductor. The specifics of how College Conductor works are not super relevant to what we discuss. I will introduce them as needed along the way. It's all about college admissions, so it talks about schools and deadlines and stuff. So that's the vocabulary we'll be using, but you certainly don't need to be a college admissions expert to have any idea of what's going on. So in my stream, I like to encourage people to chat. The purpose of this is to teach people programming, teach people about a project that is bigger than a toy tutorial application, and get some exposure of how do you solve more complex problems, or just how do you do web development that is actually live and manage a site that way. So you're welcome to chat. I'm also available on social media, on Twitter as MB Lehman. I have a website which I think is listed in the corner, the upper right corner, which you can visit my website, which I write about tech topics like Python and Django. I have a mailing list that you can join. And if you enjoy this content and want to catch future streams, please do me a favor and subscribe on Twitch and follow me. That way, when I have future streams, you'll know what's going on. So tonight we're going to work on automation aids. I have some back-end kind of work that needs to happen. It's a slightly manual process that I want to make faster using some automation. And we started this last week doing the actual presentation of this automation tool. But now we need to close the loop and actually have it make modifications to the data in the database. So I guess a little context is merited to know what this tool is actually doing before we get into the guts of it. We're building a tool that connects schools to a certain application type. If you're in the U.S. university and college system, or you're about to enter it, there are a variety of different applications the school. Hey there, TWIG. Sorry if I butchered your username. There are a variety of different kinds of applications that you might have to fill out as an entering college student. Twig. Okay, cool. And the purpose of this tool that I'm making is to connect my data to these applications to make the service a little richer. It's not super important why. It's just something that will add richness to the service, but we're going to walk through how we can use a Django web view and make that connection. What language? It's in Python programming language. And we're going to explore that in just a moment. So to give you context, if you want to check out the link, I've posted a link in the chat, which you might not be able to see if you're joining later. But it's at this repository, MB Lehman, that's my GitHub username, and the project is Conductor, and the issue number is 365. And it's all about, it's providing the details of what we're going to do. And you can see we checked off a couple of these things last week when we started this project, and we're going to continue that. So let's get to it. Let's get to the code. All right, so I've already pulled up the code that we were starting from last week, and we'll walk through a little bit of what it does, and then we'll talk about how we're going to need to modify it to actually work in the future. So this page pulls from these common apps. Common app is the type of application that needs to be filled out. And what I'm trying to do is connect a common app type to a school. So we pull the common app, and we then take the name that was scraped. All of this information was scraped from a background task that happens. So we know the name of the school that has that application type. And we want to find a school that exists within College Conductor and present that information and then attempt to make the connection. So the first half of this tool is the actual presentation of the data. It is going to display which school that we care about, and then it's going to display possible matches based on names that it found. And what we need the code to do as the second half of this is, if I'm the user of this tool, I want to be able to find the school that matches and say, yeah, that's the one, and click it and have the data sent back to my server and take the identifiers and then link them together. And we're going to do this all in the same view because it's a convenient way to go. So the one half of this, if you know your HTTP verbs, is a GET request. That's when the page is displayed in the tooling. The other half of this, of sending the data back, is a POST request. Right now, we handle GET requests by default. That's what Django is doing. So all this stuff is doing is pulling data from the database, sticking it into a dictionary of information, and then rendering that template out to the admin tooling. Let's take a look at what's there right now so that we can get an idea. Have I ever built a solid Python-based game? Yes and no. I have used Pygame, and Pygame is a very interesting game library and fairly capable. I don't think I've ever built out anything super complex in it. I've kind of worked through the toy examples that are available for it, but about Lua. Yes, I've also used Lua to do Love 2D. In fact, a little tangent, I just participated in the global game jam that happened globally. And my local city, Frederick, Maryland, had a game jam site, and I participated in that. Yes, Love 2D is the name of the Lua engine. The global game jam, at the global game jam, I actually used a new game engine to me, not new in the scheme of the world, but called Godot. That's Godot. I think it's French. And it uses a scripting language called GDScript, which actually looks very much like Python. So very promising engine. I think if I pulled up one of my other browser tabs right now, I'm looking at the Godot documentation and trying to get really steeped in it. But we're going to focus on web development. I'm happy to answer some game questions if you've got them later, and we can kind of interject them as necessary. Oh, cool. Built many games on web. Very good. So let's fire up our web server. So I'm using a tool called Honcho. Honcho is a process manager tool. It's designed to run a bunch of processes at the same time. If you're from the Ruby world, there's an analogous tool called Foreman, but Honcho is a Python version that's made specifically for Python so that I don't have to have Ruby at the same time. So that brings up a web server and a background worker and starts up the JavaScript tooling, which is what that front end thing that you see at the side, and all brings it up into one space. So that when I go over to my development stuff, I can see on port 8080 that this is my local site. So let's take a look at the tool that we were building. I should clarify, these tools are not necessarily pretty. They're meant to be used by me as the administrator, and I don't want them to look totally ugly so that I don't have like just plain HTML, but at the same time, they're not designed for the users of the College Conductor service, so I'm not spending a ton of time doing the UX UI. Really, they're meant to be tools to get stuff done quickly. Thanks for sharing, Twig. That looks interesting. So here is our Common App tracker, and currently I have no data to back this, so there's nothing to actually even display here on the site. It's sort of empty. And I don't even know, did we even get to the template last week? I'm not sure that we did, so let's take a quick look. So the tracker is in this trackers connect common apps HTML file, and we can jump over to that file and see what's here. Okay, So I just put in a shell of this, so we didn't even get as far as connecting the Common App. So what we want to display is the school that we're trying to connect. And so let's go ahead and put in some of that information. So the school is going to be the Common App Tracker is what I named it for the context. So if you look onto the right side, right display, you can see a context dictionary that contains Common App Tracker and a list of schools. And schools are going to be the choices that we display. So I want to display the name so we know what school we're considering. And then let's end that with a paragraph tag. Again, not designed to be super pretty, but designed to be useful. Okay, so let's make that, I'll make that a little bigger. Let's see, let's try H3 maybe, instead of a paragraph. Just to indicate that this is the thing that we're working on. Okay, so the school is University of Virginia. That's dummy data that I often put in because that's where I went to school. And so now the other piece of this is we want to loop through the schools that were queried. So let's back up a little bit and see what that list of schools is. So it starts off with an empty list. And then if we go through the pieces of the name from the Common App, so that's what's happening here. We split it into pieces, and then we go through each of those parts. So in University of Virginia, that's 3 words, University of in Virginia. And we take out the common words and we ignore them because we don't care about the word university. That's going to turn up too many results. We don't care about articles like the and a and of, although of may not be an article, whatever. I'm an engineer, not an English person. But I'm throwing out common words because it doesn't matter. So then once we have like actual words that might be unique to consider, in this case, Virginia, I'm doing a filter on them to say, give me all of the schools that look like they contain Virginia in the name. And it's going to return a query set, which in Django is a set that represents a query to the database. And we're going to go ahead and evaluate that into a list. The evaluation into a list forces Django to actually run the database query. And so we're using the extend method on the schools list to take whatever comes back from the database and put it in schools. So you can imagine if there are perhaps a school with multiple names like SUNY Binghamton, which are both unique names or something of a state university of New York. You can get a query for SUNY, S-U-N-Y, and you can get a query for Binghamton, and you get the joined results. So I'm actually not deduplicating that, so there might be some schools that get repeated a little bit, but again, this is not something that's meant to be displayed to users, so I don't really care if something shows up more than once. So that gives us the list of schools, and over here in the actual tool, we want to loop through those schools. So we're going to do a for loop and say for school in schools, and this is Django template syntax, which is kind of embedded Python in the HTML. If you're not very familiar with template languages, and it gives you a way to dynamically create HTML pages. And for now, we'll say, how about this? Let's first do if schools, because we don't want to display anything if that's the case. And then we'll say an unordered list is what we're going for. And then finally, we can take our for loop and put it in here, put it like that, and then say a list item of, just for now, we're going to take the school name, because I just want to see what kind of results this will turn out. Eventually, this will become like individual forms, which we'll get to in a second. But we're building out a very hopefully straightforward HTML template. Okay, let's go back over to the page and see what kind of results we get. All right, great. So locally, I have a lot of, I've pulled essentially a lot of the same schools from my initial list that I have in production. So there's a lot of really good data that we can look at here to kind of have a sort of a real world case study. And you can see that there's a match. So let's discuss what this should do. So we want to basically make a potential form for each of these schools. And I'm going to then, in the form, use some hidden input fields to record the values that we care about. And then on the other side, when we're getting the data out of the HTTP post request that is sent back to the view, we will extract the IDs from these schools, and I will then make the connection and save it to the database. That's the idea. So let's do that. In fact, I'm not actually sure that I even want an unordered list. I don't think that was really even necessary. So let's do this. Let's do it like that to take them out. And we're going to say, keep it as what? Well, we're going to need a form. And the method is going to be a post. And the action, I'm going to say, is an empty string. And so what that's telling the browser is when it's come times to do the post request, use the same URL that you're currently at. So that will put us right back into our Connect Common Apps view that's on the right side there. And we want to close off our form like that. Inside of the form, let's do this. Let's change this back to a paragraph tag. And let's just start there. See what everything looks like now. Oh, whoops. I messed up. I still have the end if there. So thankfully, okay, so there's a cool lesson that the template language is trying to be helpful. So it wants to find matching blocks, because if it doesn't have a matching block, it doesn't know how to parse the thing properly. And so we have that benefit for this. So we saved it again. Now it should come up. This is, yeah, that'll probably work. Okay. So what is the next part going to look like? We need a button, and maybe even put the button at the beginning of our paragraph. And the button is going to be a submit type button. And that should trigger, I think I'm doing this right, that should trigger the submission method. I don't think we need an input type of button. I think we can do it this way instead, or excuse me, an input type of submit. And let's say connect and see what this looks like. Looks terrible. We're forgetting, so I'm using Bootstrap, so we can add a little bit of styling to say class button primary, and okay, that's better. Still not super pretty, but again, that's the important part, is not to make this gorgeous, it's to be a useful tool. And what happens, let's bring up the inspector. Let's bring up the network tab, and I'm going to persist the logs. I'm going to click this and see if I actually did it right. Oops, okay. So we got our first thing that we have to deal with. The Django Web Framework has something called CSRF, which stands for, there it is, cross-site request forgery. Cross-site request forgery is a way that your website can be exploited. It is a kind of a deep security subject, but the important thing to note probably is that that Django has tools to bypass to like mitigate, to fix this problem. And the way it does that is by giving a special token that when you submit your form, that token must be included with the form. And if the token is not included, you get a forbidden error. And this has to do, I think it has to do with JavaScript. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head. But if you want to go learn more, there is a website called OWASP, I believe. Yeah. So this is a very well-known thing for lots of web developers. It will teach you about the most important security things that you need to consider when doing web application development. Here we go, the OWASP top 10 most critical web application security risks. And this is maybe not the right page. Let's find the real page. I forget what OWASP stands for, but it's a web security group, and they kind of highlight. And there it is, number 8, and they'll tell you what the big problems that you can have on your website are, and then techniques for how to mitigate them, and then some explanations. There's tons of details. You could go learn a lot more, and I would suggest that you do. If you're getting into web development and you want to write safe web applications, starting with this list is a good way to learn how to make them safe. I will say this list is not exhaustive, so you can always make websites more secure. There are levels of security along the way, but this is a reasonable one, is to at least include the cross-site request forgery stuff. So how do we do that? Thankfully, Django gives a very simple tag to use, and I believe it's just CSRF token, like this. We'll see if I get that syntax right. So let's go back and refresh the page just to make sure that we're doing everything okay. And let's inspect the markup that's here. Okay, good, I got it right. Take a look at this tag right here. So it's an input, it's a type hidden, and it has a name, CSRF middleware token, and it has a value. That's a really long thing. And this is really hard for a bad guy to get access to and replicate from the context where CSRF protection is going to cause you trouble. So just by having this as one of the input types, when we submit our data to Django, Django is going to look for this CSRF token, and if it's present, it will validate it against some information in the backend that it cares about. And if it validates properly, it'll allow the post to continue. So let's try this again. I believe this will still fail, but I believe it will be for a different reason. It did not seem to do anything. So what happened? Okay, let's try clearing this out. And what's going on? Okay. So we can see that we did a post to this view, to this URL. Okay, I think what's going on right now is that our view doesn't currently handle post. So Django is routing everything into the view. And the view, if you're not familiar with Django terminology, is the function that handles that URL. It's this function right here. Okay? And since we didn't say post in here anywhere, we didn't check the method type, what Django is doing is just saying, well, I guess the only place I can send you is to this view. So go here and do whatever it says to do. And this view is saying, well, just render this page and display it. Nothing is really changing. So it looked like nothing happened, but it really reloaded the page. And we can probably even see that if we go over to our logs And here we go. Here it is, down here. So this is where our log was saying we didn't have the token, and we fixed that, and we refreshed the page. And when we submit it again, and HTTP 200 is the OK code, that's the successful code. So we now need to make our page react to the post request. That's the next step. So let's do that from a test, I think. So I'm basically satisfied with what's going on over here. The rest of the page, from a user interface perspective, it's kind of clunky, but I think it's really basically done. And I put the connect button on this side just so that everything would line up and be kind of visually easy to read. I could have put the connect on the other side of the name, but then we would have had this ragged connect button going down. And so this just made it look kind of consistent. We could add spacing there, and maybe we should, but I don't really care. Well, maybe I do care. I'm kind of OCD like that. So let's say try, what is it? PX3? Is that right? Ooh. What's going on here? No. Don't resend. Go back to this page. Nope, that wasn't P. Let's try M. There we go. Okay. So Bootstrap comes with some spacing utilities. And what I did was added a margin X for the X-axis with a value of 3. It's a little much. Maybe we'll say 2. Kind of tighten it up a little bit. All right, so that looks nice enough. The rest of information that we need to put in here is all about adding IDs that we can pull out of the request as we need to. But before we can do that, we need to handle the post. And so I'll pause for a second. If anyone has any questions, please let me know. I'm here to answer questions. I'm happy to keep teaching in this manner if that's the way that you learn best, but I will certainly stop and try and answer questions if there are any to consider. Gives me a break to stop talking to. So let's write a test. And for now, let's close our template. I don't think we need it. So down here, we tested the OK path. We wanted to make sure that this happy path of getting the page using a GET request worked out. Now we want to test a post request. So let's say test post OK. And I'm going to take what's here and copy it. So what needs to change is we need to get do an authenticated post rather than a get. And it's going to need some data to do a proper post. So I'll say data equal data, and then we'll do this of just a dictionary, an empty dictionary for the moment. Okay, I think this should pass, and it does. Cool. Let's go to our view, and now it's time to make our view actually handle a post request. How do we do that? The Django request object, that's this thing right here, HTTP request, comes with a variety of attributes, and for the sake of talking about them, let's look at them. So you can, whoops, sorry, Python 2 leaking through. It's a function in Python 3. It's very easy to inspect stuff in Python. It's one of the things I love about Python. You can kind of introspect and see all of its parameters and learn a lot about classes, a lot about functions and parameters just kind of by poking at it and printing at stuff. So let's run our test again. And so I printed, and I used the built-in dir. And dir does one of two things. If you don't give it any input, dir will give you, I believe it's the locals of wherever you are. So if you're in a function, I think it gives all of the local attributes that are there. If you do give it an object, it will give you all of the attributes that are on that object. So what you see here of this list right here is that printed output, and it is everything that is part of the HTTP request. And it's alphabetical, so I want to jump to M, and this is what we care about, method. Okay. So when we are about to modify this this code, we're going to want to do a check on the method. And so we're going to say if request method is equal to post. I believe it's all caps. Well, then we want to take some action, which I'll just say pass. Or else we want to do everything else. Trying to think of the way I want to structure this. So we can, I think ultimately what I'm going to have happen in this right here is we're going to do, if it's successful, we're going to do a redirect to this page again, because this tool that I'm building, I want to be able to, like, let's look over here. I want to find a school, University of Virginia. I want to find it in the list, hit connect, and have it redirect me back to this same page and give me the next one. Like maybe the next one is Johns Hopkins University, which is my other alma mater. And I want to be able to just like crank through these things. And I think that the success route of handling the post is there's really not a lot of validation to do because I'm building out the form of everything that can happen. It will save the connection in here and then do the HTTP redirect right here. We'll do return HTTP response redirect, I believe is what it is. Okay, but we're not going to do that quite yet, or maybe we should. Maybe that's step one, is a successful post. Instead of doing a 200 response, you should actually do a redirect. Yeah, I think that's right. So let's change our view down here and say post OK to, instead of being a 200, I believe that the number we want is 302. Yeah, I think that's right. And so the other bit of this is I want to assert that in the response redirect that we're coming back to this same page. So we want to say that I want to use reverse, and this is trackers connect common apps, I believe is the name of the URL. Django gives names to all of its views so that you can reference it by that name rather than a path. That has some other benefits which we can talk about later, or for anybody's curious, feel free to ask for more details of how that's helpful and I'll explain it. And then we want to say response get location, and I believe that's right. Is that right? Yeah. And we don't want to do equal because this could be slightly different. We just want to check that that path is in there. Now if we do this, it should fail. And it does. Because it's still, we haven't changed the view to return anything different, so it's still returning a valid HTTP response, which is a 200. So let's come up here and let's change this. And this will be our first indicator that that the post route is being handled, post path is being handled differently. So HTTP response redirect is, I believe, the name of the thing that we care about. And we want to reverse trackers connect common apps. And we're missing both of those imports, but I know they're in the test, so let's get that there. So we need Django URLs reverse, and that gets rid of that one. And then we need HTTP response redirect, which is that one. And I believe that this type signature here of HTTP response is still correct, because the response redirect is actually like a subclass of an HTTP response. And an HTTP response does the work of taking the bytes of data that you have, in this case like the rendered output, and submitting, working it through Django to submit everything back through the web server and provide a proper response. So let's go back to our test and check how we did. Whoops. I said tracker, and it should be trackers is the name of the application that we're going from. Great. So let's take a second to talk about why we do a redirect. Because if you think about it, like, why not just handle it here and let everything fall through? And maybe there's something to be said for that, because this is going to pull up the next one. Yeah, it might be able to work either way, but in a lot of proper forms, you don't want to like have submissions. You don't want to have people refresh because it might have weird side effects. So by doing a redirect, it's doing a fresh get and going back to that page from square one, and pulling all the data up properly. And so it's not handling it from a post and being a little weird in that way. It just is. It's going to preserve more of the behavior that you expect from the web. So, but it's time to do all the work now. And what we want to do in our test is, on the other side of this, we need to so we need to create a common app tracker. So let's do that. And I'll show you why in a second. And I'm using the factories. So I'm using Factory Boy, which makes a place for to create database rows. And so that's a really powerful way that you can make just enough data that you need in the test, so you're not making too much and you're not having tests that interact like you can if you did Django fixtures. So it makes just the data that you need to prove that it's working. And we also want this to have the status of pending. So we want to do common app tracker pending. Okay. And then when we're done with this on the other side, we want to verify a couple of things. We want to do, so we're going to take our common app tracker instance, and we're going to call a function called refresh from DB. And that's a little Django helper to like do a new query on it to pull down the data, because we want stuff to have changed and be able to assert that it has changed on the other side. And so we need to have, we want to assert that the status is going to be different. So the status is going to go from pending to tracked is one of the things that we have in here. So common app tracker dot tracked, and that will be common app tracker status. Okay. So that's enough at this point to get a failing test, I believe. And it says 2 equal 1, but the translation is this is tracked, 1 is pending. Okay? So that's bit number 1. The other bit that we want to have is an assertion that the tracker is connected to a school, because we're trying to simulate that the data was sent through the template and connected and put in the post parameters and pulled out, and then everything went hunky-dory. So we're going to need a sample school to work with, and we want the Common App Tracker model. I'll take a second to look at that. It has as one of its parameters a foreign key to a school. That's the value that this whole tool is going to be adding, is it's going to be making the connections. And the purpose is, once I've made the connections and done the actual analysis using my brain, I'll be able to, a user will be able to go to the site, go to one of these schools that uses the Common App, and by having this connection in place, I'll be able to display, hey, this particular university uses the Common application for its students. That's the whole point. So the other thing that we need to assert in our test is that the school that we just created is connected, because by default, that school is going to be none. So we've got a school, and we want to check that it's connected at that attribute. Okay, so if our test passes this, then we win. Although, wait a minute, we're not quite done, because we need to think about the payload that's going to go into this. So this is going to have to map to the name that's used on the input tags that will be on the other side. So I'm going to use the same keys that we have been using just to keep it very clear. So we want I want the Common App Tracker, and that, whoops, I see a typo. Common App Tracker, and the value for this, forms come in as string values, not in typed ways. So the value for this is going to be the string value of the Common App Tracker ID, the primary key. That's one. The other thing is a school, and it's the same thing, the string value of the school ID. So that's the data that will be coming into the post request, which is what's getting connected here with this helper method. So there's a request factory that is generating HTTP requests, and an authenticated post is using the user to authenticate and taking this data as this is going to be the body of that request. Okay. So now, if we can make this test pass, which it doesn't right now, we're all good. We're going to come up here to the place where we need to make the change. And the first thing we're going to do is extract the Common App Tracker ID from the request. So the data for a request goes in a post, this post thing, and it's basically, it's a dictionary. It's slightly more complicated than that, because I think a post can have multiple values, so it's multi-dict or something like that, but don't worry about it too much. And the name that we're going to look for is Common App Tracker. That's that ID. We also want the school ID, and we want request post get school ID. And if I was doing like actual user reviews, things that weren't protected, maybe I'd be a little bit more vigilant in the parameters that I expect to get back. But because I'm making this like purpose-built view, I feel pretty safe not doing a lot of extra validation and checking on this. because this is not a public view. It's something that's meant for me. So now we have the IDs, and so the first thing that we can do is we can get the Common App Tracker from the database. We do that by saying objects get ID Common App Tracker ID. Okay, and see how, yep, it's still failing, but we didn't have anything blow up, so the code that we wrote is working just fine. The next bit that we care about is a school. So we want to do the same kind of query. Actually, we don't even need to do that. Let's forget that. So I already have the primary key, and so what I want to do is do this. I'm going to take the Common App Tracker, and the way that Django actually internally kind of stores IDs, because let me finish a thought. But let me finish that thought by bringing up the models again. Sorry, I'm kind of a little scatterbrained about this, but I promise this will make sense. So this is a foreign key. A foreign key, if you know SQL, is you can think of like a database table, which is what this model represents, is one database table, and each common app in this table is one row. And so table, spreadsheet, whatever term floats your boat. In this row of information is like the date, the name, the slug thing, this status field, and this school foreign key. And a foreign key is really an identifier to a different table. So we have one table for Common App Tracker, one table for school, and we want Common App Tracker to be able to say, this thing is connected to this school over here at this row. And the way that data is stored, the foreign key doesn't actually store the whole school because it can't shove all that data into this other table. It just says, here's the number. So if I ever need to get the school for this Common App over here, I'll take the number that I have and do the lookup over here, and then I can get all the school information. So what's actually stored in this in the table is that number, and the trick is that Django, if you were to analyze the database tables that are generated, stores it at a name that is like this, school ID. So if you want to save the connection without doing an extra query on the database, I can do this, and it saves the ID properly because I already have the ID from the post. And I'll show, just to make this very clear, I'll show the other way that this can be done, and that should clear up if there's any confusion about this. What do you mean by school ID versus school? I'll show off both methods. The other piece that we care about is changing the status from pending to now it's going to be tracked. So we want to say Common App Tracker. We want to change it to tracked. And now let's save it. And the save is what's going to do an update on the database to change the records fields to the stuff we care about. So our test should pass if we did it all right. Oh, didn't do it right. So what did I do wrong? Fox College. Oh, you know what I did wrong? There it is. I pulled out as school ID, but I said in my test I was going to call it school. Okay, now it's working. So the things that we can't pass entire records back over the HTTP post. So the best that we can do is pass an identifier that will allow us to look up the school. All right, so now let's finish this thought process on whether we could we have done this. rather than using the school ID things, let's just comment out this. We could have done, and just to prove this is now broken, okay, there's no saved school connection, right? So the other way we could have done this is saying school and go ahead and pull the school object from the database using the ID that we get, and like that. And then we could say common app tracker school and set it to this school record. Okay. These two lines and this line, they are equivalent in the result. Like you see the test passes. The downside of this approach that is currently uncommented, these two lines, is that we ran this unnecessary query to get this record out of the database. We're pulling all this data out of the information out of the database just enough to say, like, here's the foreign key, Django, go save the foreign key. So instead, I like to take this approach where we are already recognizing all we need is the foreign key. Let's just connect them. All right. So we now have a working page. It now redirects. So it does everything that I think I want, because what it's going to do is just give me this flow of here's the next school, here's the next school, here's the next school. So let's test it out, shall we, to prove if we did it right. So I still have the web server running. It's been reloading every time I've been saving, probably. Yeah, you can see that the Celery is restarting over and over, and I believe the application server has been restarting as well. And let's take a look. Let's jump over to the admin for a second just to see what kind of dummy data that we're working with, so that you have a clear idea of what's going to be happening. So in Common App Trackers, I have two schools in here right now. I have University of Virginia and Johns Hopkins, and it's a pending one, and it has no school connected, and this is a pending one and has no school connected. So if we do this correctly, if I did this right, we're going to come over to our tool page. I'm going to refresh it just to make sure. Oh, I missed something. I didn't actually make the template do the right thing. So this would have done nothing, and we would have been scratching our heads of like, why is this code not working? Or worse yet, it would have probably exploded because these would have pulled out parameters that didn't exist. So let's fix that. Let's go back to the template. And here we're going to add a couple of hidden inputs, because I don't need to actually be selecting anything. This is what the magic of this automation is doing for us, is that it's putting in all of the actual values that we care about, and all we're doing is like clicking a button, which is nice. So we're going to give a input that is hidden, is going to have a name of one of them is going to be Common App Tracker with a value of the Common App Tracker ID, and that's 1. And we'll have a second input that is going to be the school with the school ID. So those two inputs alone, they should be enough to make the page and all of these forms actually proper. Let's refresh. Let's inspect to take a look at the form and see if it makes sense. So our Common App Tracker has a value of 1. There were only 2 records, so that's a reasonable thing. They'll all say 1 because University of Virginia must have been the first one that's created. And school of 149, that must be VMI's ID. And if we expand another one, we've got a, same, it's still a 1, the value is 246, and so on and so forth. So all of these IDs are in here, and these are all valid forms that we can submit And why don't we do this way? Let's go back. I kind of want to watch one happen just to give us some extra confidence. So I'm going to go back to the network tab. We're going to persist the logs and consider the flow that will happen here. So we've got our University of Virginia page. Looking through the list, this is what I would do as a user. I'd come and see, well, it's University College at Wise, that's close, but I went to UVA and I know that's not the same school. It's like a branch school that's somewhere else. But here's the University of Virginia main campus. This is the one that I want to connect to. So I think that when we click the connect button, the browser is going to do a post HTTP request. It will send across Common App Tracker, the ID, and the school ID, which, well, let's take a look, is, well, UVA happens to be school number 1. It's the first school I put in. So it's 1 and 1, and then jump over to the network. So that's the data that we'll go over. It'll do lookups, it'll save to Common App Tracker, and then it should do a redirect to the next pending school. We only have 2 records, so you can imagine that the next pending school is going to be that other record, which is Johns Hopkins. We can do that again. And I think when there's finally nothing left, it'll probably just display nothing. So let's try it out. Got persist logs on, clicking connect. Okay, the next school showed up was Johns Hopkins, great. Let's go back and look at the post. The post is here. It's sent, so we sent, what did we send? This is the data that we sent, that CSRF middleware token for our CSRF protection, and then these 2 parameters. And then it refreshed and redirected to us here. And look, we've got Johns Hopkins University at the top. So that must be the other one we want. Let's click connect again. And now we're at this empty page, which tells me that there are no more pending schools, which does exactly what I care about. So that took, what did that take? I mean, I spoke through a lot of that, but let's think about if I had actually been doing this like as the production user going through my database, clicking through the pages. I would have gotten through 2 schools in about 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe, if it's long enough to recognize them. And that would have been awesome. So we'll come back over here. We'll refresh. Oh, I'm not displaying anything else here. So we'll open up these 2, take a look at the admin again, and look, now we have our foreign key connection to University of Virginia, and over on this one, we have our foreign key connection to Johns Hopkins, and the status is tracked. I think that's a success. So let's contrast this with what would this have looked like if I didn't have this tool at all, and I had, let's clear this information out. No, I don't want to delete that school. Thanks. How do we clear this out properly? See, I don't even use the admin enough to know how to do this right. So that's editing it. And that's a really unnerving message. It's asking me to delete. No, oh, okay. That is really not what I want. That's kind of scary. I want to delete the connection, but okay, let's create a new one so that we're not messing with this. I don't want to mess up I know this is just dummy data, but still, this is not worth deleting a bunch of other stuff that I already had going. So let's add a new school. Let's say University of Maryland, College Park. And we'll save and continue editing. So this is creating a new record. I wouldn't have done this. This was done by a background task that was like collecting this information for me. So this is not information. I'm just setting up like a synthetic thing so that you can see like how this flow would have had to go if I did this myself. The way I would have had to do this if I was doing this manually without the aid of this tool is I would, from this list of common app trackers, and it's not even, the admin is not even configured properly to let me filter on the pending ones. That's an improvement I would have made. But I would find the next pending one, which would be this one. I would click it, wait for the page to load, which wouldn't be this long because there's SSL issues with localhost. Don't worry about that. So it would have been reasonably fast to load it. But then I'd come in here and I'd see, okay, I need to change the status to tracked. So there's a few seconds. And then I need to connect a school. So let's hit this plus button. And, oh, not a new school. So that's wrong. Let's change the, oh, I don't have a selected school. So that's not right either. So am I left with this thing? Browsing through thousands of, like literally multiple thousands of schools to find this? I'm hoping that that the idea is coming across that this would not have been fun, maybe even possible, because like the thought of like having to browse through this and find the school that I wanted is crazy. Versus coming over here, now I've got University of Maryland, College Park. Okay, I know it's this one. I got a result like right away. Boom, done. Move on to the next one. So that is the automation piece of this, and that's what's going to save me a lot of time, because when I was thinking about this process workflow, the only value that College Conductor has is if the data set about all the schools has a lot of rich connections. That means if I'm tracking all of the different application types, and so a user can come in and say, tell me about University of Maryland, and that I know definitively, because I'm tracking each of these other services, that it has a connection to the Common App or the Universal App or a school app, whatever. That is information that I want to be able to add to make the service valuable. But I knew that the process of collecting that information was going to be ultra tedious. So hopefully you've seen through this exercise how, we didn't have to make something gorgeous. Didn't even have to be particularly complex. It just bring some information, aggregate it together, and give a way that it can be quickly processed and scanned to take on this task. The nice part is now I can deploy this to my site and go through and at my leisure start connecting schools and making the service have more valuable data connections. So I think that kind of concludes, well, actually, before we do that, let's go check the issue and see. We've got connecting to the schools via click. This one it's not really relevant anymore. I was thinking of a different way to do this that we already eliminated. And add a link to the admin page. So, okay, what is this about? I was thinking that some of these might be unclear. Like, we've had University of Virginia and it has an exact name match. That was exceptionally clear. Not every school is going to map exactly with a name that I have in the database. And so it's very possible, or worse off, and the mistake I don't want to make is having multiple schools that are extremely similar, but are ambiguous in like, which one is it? So I don't want to connect to the wrong school and then provide misinformation that says, SUNY Binghamton, I don't know why I keep picking that one, but it's just one that pops in my head, is connected to this type of application when in fact they're not. That would be bad, and I think a disservice to the people that I'm trying to serve. So we can add a link to the admin page so that if I get down to an ambiguous situation, I can do the deeper analysis, because right now if you look at the tool, like there's just no way to go back to the admin. So I'd have to go over to the admin and then do the query. So let's add that real quick for completeness. And the way to add that, so in the Python side, the way we did a URL lookup was with reverse, right? The way to do that in a template is with URL. So we want to say down in the school name, I'm going to put a parenthetical that says that's going to be a hyperlink, and I'm going to leave it empty right now. And I'm going to say target equals blank because I don't want to take myself away from this tool, and just say admin and end the tag like that. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so this is just going to be my kind of escape hatch to say, okay, which is it, this one or this one? I want to be able to click and go there. So now we need to populate this with, and I think we can, here, that doesn't need to be on the same line. We can separate it a little bit. Thankfully, HTML is pretty forgiving about spacing. So this will let us, the result will look the same, but it'll be a little clearer to read from the code level. So I'm pretty happy with this stuff over here. So I think we can close that and ignore it. So we want to put in the URL for the admin. And this is where we're going to need some help from documentation. The URL is something like admin change list, something like that. How do I want to go about this? Let's open up a new tab and let's dive into the code. Cool part about open source, one thing I love about it is that, and Python in particular, is you can just read the code. If you ever have a problem of what's going on here, sometimes the best way to do it is dig into the code. So I'm going to navigate to where Django is. I'm using a virtual environment, so you can see that this is the virtual environment. It's a virtual environment specifically for Conductor, and my shortcut here of cd site packages takes me straight to the site packages area where Django is installed. The URL that I'm trying to find is in the contrib package. Sorry, my printer is going back there for some reason. So let's see. And it's in the auth module. And I think it's in URLs. No, not auth, sorry. This is the admin. Ooh. That's not really contrib, is it? Or maybe it is. Where do I want to look? I don't really see URLs. So let's do, I think it's something like change list. I'm just doing a search for it and see if I can find a hit. Yeah, that seems right. Change list. Okay. Okay. What's the worst that can happen? We can say change list. Oh, yeah, that's totally not going to be it. We need a change list for a specific model. So how do we get the... All right, time to get out the documentation. Django admin change list URL. There's probably some documented way of getting it. So the page that we want to do, okay, it's in this format of app label, model name, change list. See if we can find a clear example. Okay, so the app label that we care about is trackers. The model is common app tracker, and it's change list, and the URL is going to need the common app tracker ID. I think that'll do it. How'd I do? Nope. Trackers common app tracker change list is not valid. Bummer. So I've been doing Django for a long time, and I still make mistakes. It happens. Let's see if we can dig it up. Now let's go to the docs. How about that? Maybe we don't need the admin on the front part. Let's try without the admin. The admin is like a namespace part, and maybe that's not necessary. Let's close some of these things. Nope. What's going on? Kind of wishing it would give me all of the valid names. It doesn't seem to want to. Oh, change list doesn't take an object ID. So maybe I'm bringing up the wrong thing. Maybe it's just change. I think I see two things that could be wrong. I'm putting underscores in here. I think that's probably one thing that's wrong. So I think this will still fail. Yeah, so let's try taking it out, because I call these by when I'm trying to name them as variables with underscores to make it easier to read. But the generated name is not that either. Common app tracker. Maybe now we need admin. Boom. Okay, there it was. So now let's think about that ambiguous scenario again. So we have this, and let's pretend we didn't know which one it was, and I just wanted to look at this one. Okay, I can now click it, and it opens up over here, and I can at least see like what was the common app information that was displayed. That's not what we care about, is it? I'm glad I did this. Okay, so there's two links that I want to be able to get to. Up here, the common app one is really belongs up here in the like with this guy. Right, because this is the admin link to the common app. What I wanted to link to down here is not the common app, it's the school. So I know that's in planner school change, and we want to be able to pass in school ID. Okay, so refresh. Now we have the admin link. That takes us to common app tracker. That's good. And now clicking this takes us to as soon as it loads from the SSL. So like if I wanted to go learn more about this school, I already track a bunch of information about the schools, like what's the URL, and I can use that to like verify that kind of information. So I'm glad I went back to the issue before we finish this off. So it's a little noisier now. It's got this extra link on the side. Whatever. But that finishes it off so that at least I'll have all the tools that I care about. So that reaches like a good stopping point for the evening. The rest of the stuff is like me going and deploying it, which at some one of these streams I'll dig into a little bit more about deploying and how I do that. But I don't think it's super necessary to do for this stream. So let's kind of recap what we did. we started with a view that was already displaying just the raw data. It had the Common App Tracker instance that we cared about. It had a list of schools that we'd queried based on the relevant parts of the school name, and it put that all in the template. And then we populated the template with that name of that school, and then we looped through the schools and made a form for each school. And the form was intended to do this bit of processing right here, which was to get the IDs, make the connection, change the status of this tracker instance, and then save all that information, and then load the form again. So I have like 700 of these to do. So the more that I can make this as fast as possible, the better. So, but before we even got to writing this chunk of code, we wrote a test. We used some test-driven development to make a test case or just a test function that sets everything up, creates the necessary data in advance, and here, let's actually, I think I want to keep that local, closer to the request. So it creates the data that we care about, creates a school, it packages up all that data into what's going to go into the request. Maybe that's the right spot. And then we make the actual call, which comes in and does the post, and then we verified that the parameters that came out of that got updated in the way that we wanted. This tool will be super useful. It's like an automated aid is the way I've been. Last week I called it a semi-automated task. That's sort of true. It's really it does a lot of automation itself, but it's just an aid. Either name kind of works. But the idea is just giving me a way to get something done a lot quicker. So I think that sort of ends things. So let's see. Do we have any failures in our test suite? Whoops. Okay, so I've got a test to clean up. That's something that I must have called something without any information. So I got to figure out what that is. Sometimes you run into these corner cases. This is why you write good tests. And yeah, was it this one? Okay, I think what's happening is we're trying to do a lookup of when we don't have any information. So the test is doing in the rendering of the template, the test is trying to do this lookup for the Common App Tracker change, that admin link, but because it's not there, because there's no value, it can't put the URL together properly. So let's fix it for posterity's sake. So we only want to display the school, the tracker, if we have one. So this should, by adding this here and moving that like so, I think that should fix that test. Yeah, cool. So how did I solve that so quickly? I just read the error message. Always read your error messages. It's very easy to get overwhelmed and be like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing this gigantic traceback of tons of information, but hone in on the error message and it'll help you out. So the tool's pretty much complete at this point. I think I'm happy with the outcome. Next week, I don't actually know what I have in store for next week, but next Wednesday we'll stream again, same time, same place, and figure out something new to work on. It might be more of this kind of automated tasks. Maybe I'll focus a bit on deployment and what that looks like, so you can see the other half of, like, operationally, how does this function? How does stuff get out? If you found this stream useful tonight, do me a favor, share it on Twitter, follow me on Twitter if you want. I don't tweet often, but when I do, it's about technical stuff. I try and keep it to that arena. That's just the way I use Twitter. If you use it other ways, that's fine. That's cool. Also, if you want to keep up with me on Twitch, you can follow me and subscribe on Twitch. And I generally post stream on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. But I don't always stream every week. Sometimes I'm out of town. Sometimes I'm running my local Python meetup in town. I'm the organizer, and so that'd be a good way to know exactly when. I do plan to stream next week on February the 6th. I believe it's the 6th, and I will post on Twitter as I have more details. I hope you found this useful tonight, and with that, I'll bid you good night. Have a good one.